now is South Dakota Republican Mike Rounds. Senator Rounds, welcome back, sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity to visit.
I know you've been on a couple times trying to sound the alarm on tariffs, trying to have, I think, what I would say a more cheerful conversation with the White House. Less cheerful today. You guys passed I guess it was called a test vote. It was non-binding on the trade aspect, not to get it confused with the non-binding NATO resolutions I talked about earlier. But what does that vote tell you? Does that tell you that the Senate does need to get involved here now? The votes are there, and the president there should be more of a check by the legislative branch on the president's tariff authority?
I think the message that's been sent is that, first of all, this is non-binding. It was specifically on defense issues. It was Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Enhancement Act, different than Section 301, which is what he's doing today in China, or suggesting he will do in China. But it all has to do with the impact on the markets with regard to what's happening right now. We've got farmers and ranchers in the upper Midwest that are bringing their products to market at this time. Winter wheat's being harvested in South Dakota right now. It won't be long until we have soybeans and corn that'll be harvested. The markets right now for commodities are going down. Matter of fact, soybeans are down $1.95 a bushel since March 1st. If you take a look at just in South Dakota, and we're not a big state, but if you just take a look at the farming operations in South Dakota right now, the difference between March 1st prices and what we've got right now in the prices as of today, it's almost $750 million in impact on the balance sheets for farmers and ranchers. And so for them, this is a real serious issue. And it's not a matter of saying, yeah, I'm going to suggest that we might have we might be putting in tariffs, because the markets react immediately, and the markets are down. They have started to account for the possibility that China might very well not be buying as many soybeans as they used to. And look, just as an example, soybeans, 60% of what we export for soybeans go into China. They amount to 25% of all the soybeans that are produced in the United States.
The president, essentially via his tweets, seems to be arguing, look, just give me time. This will be great, but give me time. Agricultural tariffs, as you're pointing out, and as I've been trying to tell people as well, is they have those hit people immediately. The metal tariffs, you can buy time on some of the metal tariffs. You can, as an operation, you can sort of move around, you could sort of maneuver yourself around them for 6 months, 12 months while they negotiate. You can't do that with these. Do you think the president understands? Both Bob Corker and Chuck Grassley seem to hint that he doesn't.
Well, that's what we're concerned about, is that time is of the essence for us. What producers in South Dakota will tell me, and I spent a week back in South Dakota, their message was, number one, look, we believe that the president's doing what he believes is right. We want him to succeed. But he's got to understand that we're at the tip of the spear right now, and time is of the essence for us, and time's running out. Tell us what your game plan is. Tell us what you want to accomplish. Give us some confidence that this is going to end well. And I think that's the message that we're trying to share is heads up. This can't go on for an extended period of time without assuring our ag producers that they're not going to be the ones that are going to take the brunt of this. It's been 5 years with falling ag prices. The ag income in our part of the country is down 50% in the last 5 years. So now to have them at the tip of the spear and seeing soybeans down, corn down, wheat down, and no end in sight, that's got a lot of people that are very strong supporters of the president. They've got them concerned.
How concerned are you that the president's antagonistic rhetoric with our allies, even with China and the EU, when it comes to trade deals with NATO, that's only going to make it harder to cut a deal? That it's only going to make it, as Stephen Hadley said, you make it easier to be anti-American in some of these other Western democracies with the rhetoric he uses, which of course means you're not going to get a better trade deal.
Well, this president has a different approach than any other president we've had in a long, long time. What we want to see is evidence of success. TPP, as an example, that was going to provide us with basically 500 million people in the Pacific Rim area that would be buying our products. Back in January of a year ago, the administration said, we're not going to take it, we're going to do individual trade deals. None of them are done. Then we were going to have NAFTA.
Right? Yeah.
No. And then we had NAFTA, and we're going to redo NAFTA, and it can be done anytime, and we're going to have a good deal. So far, we don't have any good deal, and now we're talking about delaying that once again. And in the middle of it, not having TPP done, where we'd have 500 million people buying our products, and these are people that would rather buy from us than from China. They want to do a deal with us. Not to have them on board with us, not to have NAFTA completed, does not put us in a position of strength to negotiate with China. And that's not exactly the way even the president has suggested that he wants to negotiate in the past. And so, as I say, in my part of the country, people want to see this president succeed. They don't understand the tactics that he's using to get there.
How much patience do they have? I mean, whatever gains they made in the tax cut, I assume if you're in the ag business, those are gone.
I've talked to soybean producers today. I've talked to representatives of the American Farm Bureau. All of them had said the same thing. We're supportive of the president. We get that we don't have really good trade deals out there, but it's gotten a lot worse in the last couple of months. So what's the plan? Where are we going with this? We need to know as well, because time is running out for us, and it's going to hurt our pocketbooks if we don't get something done. And that's the message we're trying to send. And they ask us, so why don't you go in and tell the president that? And I say, I think sometimes the president listens a whole lot more to the folks back home than they do to those of us in Congress. And so what they need to do is to share and continue to share their concerns, and ask that the White House and the administration remember that the actions they're taking now are having real consequences on real Americans who want to be supportive of this administration.
Senator Mike Rounds, Republican from South Dakota, sounding an alarm. We'll see if the folks in the West Wing hear you. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views, sir. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.